On today's episode, we're going to uncover the secrets of the Fenn Treasure, a $2 million chest of gold hidden somewhere in the Rockies by an eccentric art dealer. To do that, we'll drive a 1995 BMW 525 iX Touring over 2,000 miles, retracing the steps Forrest Fenn may have taken while deciding where to hide the gold back in 2010. Along the way, we'll dive into the origins of the controversial treasure hunt, dissect its cryptic poem, and decode the map published in his book. Our adventure will take us to obscure places just like the thousands of people who searched for it before it was finally discovered in 2020. We're going to put the 525 iX Touring to the ultimate test by proving that it's the perfect car to unlock the secrets of the Fenn Treasure and his notable crusade to get people into the wilderness and off the beaten path. This granite silver metallic Swiss market Touring survived 2.5 decades before it landed in the States. And then I made one of the worst decisions I've ever made, and I bought it. And then after that, I made an even worse decision to try to make it better. And the one thing that we weren't able to do before we leave on our trip was repair the air conditioning. But I have a plan for that. So in the past in these episodes, we've always had to go lean and mean. Well, because we have a wagon, we can live in style for the next 7 days. We're gonna bring all this stuff. We've got the Gazelle T4 tent. We've got 2 bedrolls for each of us. Cold weather sleeping bags and down blankets, pillows, go and hiking bag, water bowser, all my clothes, dry food, wet food, power bank, tool roll, jump box, buddy heater, and then I pulled the cool suit system out of the E36 lightweight race car. So now we're gonna try to fit all of this in here, which I think will fit with room to spare because it's a touring, and we're gonna get on the road to Santa Fe. We're only about 2 hours behind schedule, which is good for us. We can make that up with a little bit of sleep deprivation, but now we've got to hit the road and head for Santa Fe. One of BMW's most reliable engines, the M50 B25 non-Vanos, is gonna have to take us a long way. Fighting the late summer heat, we blazed south from Denver to Santa Fe. With the car appearing to be in good working order despite the lack of air conditioning, we hoped it would hold up for the long journey ahead. We wanted to start as close as possible to the Artist Square, but since there were no downtown campsites, we found the next best thing. Dude, this is awesome. This is a warehouse next to Meow Wolf in downtown Santa Fe that's built to resemble campsite, which is great because we're gonna be camping the next couple nights. But what a fantastic and creative idea. Tomorrow we'd start our journey in the vibrant artistic city where Forrest Fenn was a staple for decades. After serving in the Vietnam War as an F-100 pilot, Fenn returned to the States and became a successful art dealer. In 1988, he was diagnosed with cancer and sold his gallery. Believing it was the end, he committed to dying while clutching a chest of treasure in a special spot that would be his final resting place. When he unexpectedly beat the illness, the allure of an elaborate hunt endured, and in 2010 he published his memoir containing clues to the treasure. For the next 10 years, he orchestrated the unsanctioned hunt until the treasure was discovered in 2020, just months before he passed away at the age of 90. The next morning, we set out for a local coffee and breakfast tacos to start the day off strong. Then we dove into downtown to dig up any intel we could find on Fenn and gather last-minute treasure hunting essentials. What better way to channel your inner treasure hunter than with this Indiana Jones hat? Or is it the guy from Jurassic Park? I don't think either one of them was wearing a blip shift shirt. That was interesting. We gleaned a lot of insight just now from several people, which I'll expand upon later. We got a treasure hunting hat. We got a few pieces of treasure. So now we're gonna find a quiet spot and plan our mission. Here we are in front of Fenn's gallery, Nedra Mattiucci. This is where he started, so this is where we're gonna start. We've explored, researched, networked, and I think the one thing we've kind of learned, he was an extremely controversial figure. The minute you bring up his name, people kind of take a step back and like look over their shoulder. The best advice we've got is to leave sleeping dogs lay. Let's lay some ground rules. Whenever I'm doing backcountry flying or any type of guiding, my basic operational principles are just three things: safe, legal, respectful. Obviously, if we're placing ourselves in peril, we're not doing a service to anyone around us, and we're certainly not doing this to ourselves. Legal, in aviation, every single rule we have is written in blood. Pushing the boundary of that or normalizing deviance or anything like that, which leads us to the last principle, which is respectful, like leave no trace. I think one of the controversial elements of this treasure hunt was it brought a lot of people who weren't fluent, who didn't have etiquette of how to operate in the backcountry into the backcountry, and in the process, they endangered themselves, they lost their lives, and on a much larger scale, they weren't respectful to these places. So that's got to be an underlying tone. So let's try to figure out what the first stop would be. The poem begins with, "As I have gone alone in there, and with my treasures bold, I can keep my secret where, and a hint of riches new and old." At the time that he hid the treasure, he was 80. It was roughly 40 to 50 pounds. Based on other things we learned, you could carry it and it's not buried. Things that I take away from this are, there's an underlying theme of water. We know from the search area that it's north of Santa Fe. The closest river is the Rio Grande. We'll hit the road, we'll get out of town, and we'll head north. Before hitting the road, we mustered the courage to speak to the current owners of Fenn's gallery, who were nothing but kind and gracious and happy to let us look around. Our experience here is completely opposite of what we expected. We were kind of terrified to even make ourselves known, but this used to be Fenn's gallery, and then it was sold to Nedra Mattiucci, and she could not have been more hospitable. She was the nicest, most welcoming person, invited us in and gave us a tour, and thankfully for them, the treasure hunters have gone and life's resumed to normal, but
and it's only people like us that
it's only idiots like us who show up. But they did say, like, when a treasure hunter walked through the door, they could pick them immediately. Some of the more extreme examples were, one guy walked in with a Geiger counter and he was trying to conceal it, so he was like doing that. And then they caught another like father-son duo where the sons were back here in the gallery and the father was gonna throw the metal detector out. And she said she thought like what lured people here was the fact that he was 80 and he maybe couldn't go very far, and that there was water, so everybody thought the treasure was hidden in the pond here, the koi pond. So thankfully those days are gone.
What's so cool to me is like this is ground zero. He was getting older, needed maybe a reason to keep going. Maybe it was walks in these gardens that was a really good idea.
It's definitely in line with the whole theme of like getting out into the wild and nature. Part of the reason I want to film this journey is I'm closing down the service side of my business, and it's been, the last month has been really excruciating when you have a dream and you didn't succeed how you wanted to in that. And so part of getting out into the wild is to like catch my breath, reset, and just the whole calming nature and the slice. I mean, dude, you can, it's like the Garden of Eden. You can pick plums out of the tree and eat them. What a wonderful spot. You see artwork like this and you see the time and energy and expertise somebody's put into that, their vision, and it is very humbling. That seems to be a reoccurring theme that's emerging through this journey. Oh, yes.
So the fine folks at home, what is a cool suit?
The cool suit is something you use in racing because the race car is just brutally hot inside. Cooler with an electric pump. It circulates cool water through this. One line goes in, one goes out, and that water circulates around you to these lines we've fished underneath. So we plug it in here. Oh yeah, yeah, that's nice. As we headed north, we deliberated over some of the criticisms, controversies, and downsides of Fenn's outlandish idea.
So we're just reading an article. There was a gentleman who was very sure that he had found it at a place in Yellowstone, and then called into question speculation that maybe Forrest had moved it.
One of the broader criticisms of Fenn has been that the whole point of the treasure was to self-promote his books, narcissistic tinge.
I mean, his whole career was built on that.
They say it was a maverick. Well, and we don't want to dive into the controversy, but on the face of it, his motive for hiding the treasure was to get people out. Interpreting it from that baseline.
There was also a Virginian woman seeking Fenn's treasure, prompted 3 rescue missions this summer in Wyoming. On one occasion, she and a boyfriend, both poorly equipped, spent 4 days lost in the forest. In another expedition for the treasure, she broke her ankle. Somebody's body washed up near here in the Rio Grande, and then people would just ask him to call it off. So you have people out there who wouldn't normally be out there. Terrible that there was loss of life, but also how could one guy be accountable for all the people? That's not fair either.
I mean, we all make mistakes. That's what makes us human. So I don't think we should diminish that, but at the same time, at the end of the day, I'm the pilot in command of my decisions, and I need to be accountable for those decisions. And that's said from somebody that makes a lot of bad decisions.
I mean, we are sitting here right now.
Chasing a treasure that's already been found. It's the first real test of the all-wheel drive wagon being off-road. I need to, at all costs, preserve the drivetrain and the oil pan, and there's this cross member that supports the exhaust that I don't want to bend. So picking a surgical line is definitely of importance, but like, it's amazing how great the suspension is, even on the washboard. Like, it's better than my truck. It just soaks up the bumps. And then you can totally feel the all-wheel drive like when you start out. So we're off-roading on a very small scale. And we have a long way to go, so we certainly can't sacrifice the vehicle. The treasure hunt didn't hit the mainstream until 2016, when the first death was recorded near Taos along the Rio Grande. A total of 5 people lost their lives during the decade-long hunt. At one point, the New Mexico State Police implored Fenn to call it off. His standard reply was, if someone drowns in a swimming pool, we shouldn't drain the pool, we should teach people to swim. So here we are on the bridge over the Taos Box. You may know that bridge from the Natural Born Killers movie. We're never more than an arm's length away from controversy. Sadly, the Rio Grande claimed 2 separate lives over the years that people were hunting for the treasure. One of them was just downstream of here at the Taos Junction Bridge, a man from Grand Junction whose car was found and his body was recovered downstream. The great equalizer that the outdoors are. It's one thing to think about that in abstract terms. It's different if you're experiencing it. And for the family members of those people, that's an experience that's gonna stick. I had that misfortune 20 years ago in the desert of Utah, and it's an experience that I'll never forget. At the end of the day, I think it's better to seek and discover an adventure than to live your life in fear. With daylight fading, we had a quick meal in Taos and set out to find a campsite for the night. Deciphering the rules proved to be just as complicated as Fenn's poem. But after finding a tent-only site, we had the entire bluff all to ourselves. As I've gotten older, and if you can bring it, and you don't need to be kind of lean and mean, there's no reason not to be comfortable. The next morning, we awoke to a blazing sunrise that revealed the true majesty of what had been hiding in the darkness. The next stanza says, from there, it's no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. There'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and water high. So, depending on how we want to interpret that, I think we should go upstream and find the headwaters of the Rio Grande. A, that's certainly no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. Maybe that could be interpreted as flowing upstream. There'll be no paddle up your creek, which is where the Rio Grande turns from a river to a creek and a network of creeks. And the most important thing, just heavy loads and water high. At first read, that feels like I'm carrying a heavy load across high water, but what if it literally means high water, like high elevation water, water's high? We know from subsequent interviews that the treasure wasn't buried, that he said it's above 5,000 feet, which is pretty much anywhere north of Santa Fe, but it was also below 10,200 feet. Why he picked 10,200 instead of 10,000 could also be a clue to these kind of headwaters of the Rio Grande. So we'll go check out the view, we'll pack up camp, and I think we'll head north and high. On the way out of the park, we made friends with a weary traveler. Yeah, he's relatively little. Tens of thousands of tarantulas migrate from New Mexico to Colorado every year. So that they swarm from the San Luis Valley here up into Colorado. So cool, isn't it, to see a tarantula out in the wild? Hypothesizing that it was unlikely Fenn would hide the treasure so close to Santa Fe, we crossed the border north into Colorado. At breakfast, we brainstormed about what it must have been like for an 80-year-old man to carry a 40-pound chest of treasure into the Rockies, perhaps in a station wagon of his own. Man, this car is just amazing. It soaks up the miles. We've driven 1,300 kilometers so far since we started. If I slide this, somehow that still works. Individual rotary dials, and then this Euro computer that can haul everything we've brought, that has the all-wheel drive ability to go up the dirt roads. Yet, we get that refinement without paying any of the cost of the driving experience. So here we are outside of South Fork. This is what I would describe as the upper Rio Grande, where we're definitely in waters high. Our elevation here is probably around 7,500 feet. Cool. And certainly looking around, there's an old railroad bridge here that crosses the river, just heavy loads and water high. What would carry heavy loads? This old branch of the Rio Grande crossing the river here. So perhaps we should explore that area and also conduct refreshment in the process.
It might seem funny that we're looking under a random bridge, but that's how people had to look.
I mean, I've flown over the West for 20 years in the airliner and the small plane and looked down, but then you get on the ground and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna drive, I'll drive there. No big deal. Oh, it's 3 hours away and we have 2 hours of daylight. The scale of things out here is fantastic, but you definitely have to respect it. Pushing farther upstream towards Creed, we decided to investigate a pair of waterfalls. Here is a tributary to the Rio Grande in Clear Creek, and there's a series of waterfalls here as they cascade down. If I were gonna hide a treasure, this would certainly be on my short list. The pros are it's accessible by an 80-year-old man carrying a 40-pound box, but the cons are it might be a little too accessible. But there's another waterfall up the way that's a little bit harder to get to. I certainly don't think he went down in this canyon, nor do I see any reason for us to go down in there. But again, it's just not deep enough. Arriving at the headwaters of the Rio Grande, we stopped to discuss what river system to search next. You think of the Rio Grande River, that's probably not the image that comes to mind, but that is the headwaters of the Rio Grande. And they go even further up into the San Juans, and all of the summer crowds are gone. And other than the occasional hunter, there's just not a lot of people up here. I probably would have spent some time here if I was searching in earnest. But the beauty of this spot is there doesn't need to be a treasure to come here, because here we are. We literally walked out of the woods into a painting.
So if this is the end of the Rio Grande, we kind of need a new body of water, don't we?
We haven't deep dived into people's solves for this and their logic and where they went. but it just doesn't seem like this is far enough from Santa Fe. We could go over the pass here and then go northeast and pick up the Arkansas River. And there was one person that actually lost their life in Browns Canyon in the Arkansas. That's pretty heavily traveled. Like, I think it needs to be more remote than that. Dinosaur, Dutch John, Flaming Gorge, that's not an insignificant distance from here. This is one of the best driving roads in Colorado. And the beauty of the E34 wagon is like satisfy our driving enthusiast needs while also pursuing our quest deeper into the wilderness. Climbing into the eastern San Juan Mountains, the 525 carved up the winding roads with poise. Being immersed in the golden leaves and warm sunlight felt like a moment Fenn may have approved of. Fueled up and realizing the immense distance of our journey north, we decided to push into the night. All right, so what's happening is Highway 50 is one of the main arteries, and earlier this spring, metal fatigue was revealed in one of those bridges and it was shut down. And it's open during the day, but that closes at 7. So then there's this Lake City cutoff detour, which is actually a pretty good dirt road. See the degree of washboard that there is in this road, and it's not insignificant. Like, this car is so smooth. It's probably the smoothest 30-year-old BMW I've ever driven. Arriving late in the northern Colorado town of Meeker, we decided to skip setting up the campsite and take one of the last rooms available. The next morning, the miles started to reveal themselves on our trusty wagon. Seal, gas cap.
Yeah.
The door's not latching, and I kind of wonder, with E36s, it's often temperature related. I'd call that crisis averted for now. Shit, that's the only thing that happens to us. Well, and clearly we have a leaky gas tank. Seal. Taking a moment to explore a local antique store, we hit the road for what would be our longest and perhaps most desolate day yet. There's not a lot of roads I haven't been on, but this road going west out of Meeker, northwest, has been absolutely amazing. And there's no one out here. We did go to Meeker because right here it says, from there, it's no place for the meek. Maybe there was some pun intended, or maybe that was a good anchoring point. But yeah, doors and windows seem to be a constant theme. Like, my door striker I can see has some stress fracturing, but you know, any BMW wagon is a dude magnet. I'm surprised the dude hasn't just flushed himself out of these bushes right here to be like, that's an awesome car. But so we met a lot of nice dudes to talk to and share our enthusiasm with, and I think we're gonna meet a lot more. It almost goes without saying that there were infinite places Fenn could have hidden the treasure within his map. However, the clues did point to a body of water that was not too far, but too far to walk, which by our interpretation could have meant anything within a short scramble of the road. We also wondered if Fenn explored and considered any of these places on his way to where the treasure was eventually discovered. This is Vernal Falls. It's definitely off the beaten path. And this is a bit of an oasis in the middle of a desert. You certainly can't just walk down here. You have to crawl over stuff a little bit. You know, the problem is the water's really low right now, and you can see the natural path of the high water mark. The next stanza, which we'll talk about, talks about finding a blaze. And that's kind of the thing that's been missing, is we haven't found a blaze. What does that mean? And I don't know. Hundreds of thousands of people interpreted the poem over the decade that the treasure remained hidden. The majority of treasure seekers were casual, using the hunt as an excuse to explore places off the beaten path they may have never gone otherwise. As we ventured farther off the grid, we were the only car on the road for hours in this desolate stretch of northwestern Colorado. Not too far, but too far to walk. What does that mean? Does it mean it's not an easy walk? Does it mean you have to bushwhack a little bit? What's interesting, people would just go places randomly, like their solve would lead them to some obscure spot that was chosen due to some personal connection, or more frequently just somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. And wasn't that the whole point of the treasure hunt, right? To discover new places, to get out. Well, I think we've seen maybe 6 cars total, and I did find a treasure. I think Loki Dog would love this piece of treasure. Whatever animal completed the circle of life there couldn't have picked a better place to do it. We know that that was Fenn's original intent, was to find a place he could go that was peaceful, that he could clutch his treasure box, and eventually we'd find a skeleton holding a treasure box. I can certainly relate to the feeling of knowing if I was terminally ill and the outcome wasn't looking good, I certainly would want to have some say in how I completed my journey on this earth. And if that was in a place like this, treasure box or not, what a fantastic way to return to the earth. Some of the more serious treasure hunters would work on what they call solves, a logical attempt to translate the riddle. But whether you were serious or not about finding the treasure, on this road, hundreds of miles away from any major civilization, we could see what Fenn meant by getting out there in our own way. Just went through Pinedale, Wyoming. And as civilized as the E34 wagon is, the days of driving are starting to have a cumulative effect on both of us. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the seats just aren't as comfortable as they maybe once were.
It's funny, like you sit in them for an hour and you're like, oh man, this is nice. But after like 6, it's like my hip hurts. So we got about an hour of daylight left. We still haven't found a place to stay yet. So I don't know where we'll end up tonight. Spontaneity is always a big part of our adventures. And although we were hoping to get a good campsite outside of Jackson, it wasn't looking good. As the light faded, we stopped at a friend's house to pick up a last-minute package to help tell our story. So we got a few spots, just get like some last-minute groceries, and then we'll use that kind of resort with a tent spot as a backup. And we had an item shipped last minute to Jackson because it was on the way, so he was gracious enough to ship it to his place. So the problem is, even though it's deep into October and well past peak season, on a Friday night at 8:30, I'm not very optimistic we're gonna get a spot, especially being that we don't have the capability to go that deep. Say high clearance or just 4-wheel drive? I'm not very optimistic, nor do I think we should, expose ourselves to damage and or rescue. Our friend James from Michigan has offered us a spot. Carefully four-wheeling our low-slung wagon over the trail, we doubled up at a site and quietly set up camp. I wouldn't describe last night as restful. With the winds, walking up to this view this morning makes it all worth it. As amazing as the beautiful Tetons were, through the gift of intuition and hindsight, we knew the treasure was found in another national park to the north. Packing up after a bit of coffee, we headed into Jackson to plot our approach. Interestingly, this car has the European all-wheel drive sport suspension, which, unless the springs were cut prior to it arriving in my hands, is lower than a stock rear-wheel drive E34, and certainly lower than an E30iX. And not having that little bit of ground clearance means we've had to be very strategic with our line that we pick. We don't want to sidewall puncture a tire either, and then we're stranded. So we're gonna head back into town. We've got to print our permit so we can film in the park, and then maybe we'll get a little bit more coffee. Enjoying the charm of Jackson, we stopped at a breakfast spot to plan our search in one of the most heavily trafficked national parks in the country. Yesterday we were talking about cognitive bias. So I have a natural aversion to crowds. So when I interpret the treasure where it would be, my thought would be that it would be someplace undervisited, unpopulated, off the beaten path, which means I would probably want to go to some of these more remote places on some of the secondary roads here. The other way to interpret that, though, is the where warm waters halt line. That would be here along the Firehole River where it intersects with the Madison, and that's a main thoroughfare of the park. I mean, we all know where it was eventually found, but that's not the place I would look. Heading north, we quickly had to figure out our accommodations for the night. And with last-minute reservations not being available in Yellowstone, we needed a miracle to land anywhere near the park. Taking a minute to enjoy the view, we quickly realized what a mistake it was not to reserve a campsite for the night. But, I mean, that's shame on us. We got here on a Saturday. We weren't sure when we were gonna get here, so we didn't reserve a campsite, but I think these are all just closed for the season. We just head back into town, and there's a couple like RV resorts we could go stay at with Grandma in the trailers. Thankfully, just outside of the park, we found a spot that would take us and allow one last look at Fenn's poem. I was also saying I think it's a great contrast, like the wagon and the tank compared to the Sprinter vans and the campers. 20-minute drive and we found a slice of heaven. The blaze marks the spot. Whatever the definition of that blaze is, be it an actual trail blaze or an X marks the spot or a fire, some people thought. There's been quite a bit of controversy about Terry Scant with marble gaze. I think the metaphor behind that is don't spend a lot of time. Take the chest and go in peace. And then lastly, this is interesting, I give you title to the gold. And we almost wonder if that's not a legal statement, because technically speaking, from a legality standpoint, anything abandoned in the park actually becomes government property. So maybe he put that in there to defend the fact that if someone found it, they would legally own it. We'll say the guy who found it, one of the primary things that he used in his hunt was to only use sole source information. But we were able to get in touch with a treasure hunter who had a solve that he swears would have taken him to the treasure.
And I had read an article on an airplane, it was in a magazine. I was intrigued by Forrest himself. Well, there's a lot of stories in all three of his books that he refers to Yellowstone. You know, he went there a lot as a kid. You know, he and his brother built the hotel there. They used to go fishing. And he talked about the Firehole River was one of the places he loved to go swim, and that's got to be the starting spot. Now, I had it narrowed down probably the size of a football field or so. I had a wedding to go to on June 5th of 2020, and I thought, oh, the treasure's been there 10 years. It's still going to be there after that. And basically, the next day, I get all these text messages. Was it you? We were like, oh my God, we knew where it was, but it's all right because we still had a lot of fun. You know, it really only became controversial when someone passed away, right? You get hundreds of thousands of people out in the woods, and some, you know, mistakes or issues can happen.
The next morning, we woke up to frost on the wagon, which required heating the door latch again to make it close. After that, we stopped for a quick breakfast and readied for the final frontier of the journey. Fenn was a Vietnam War fighter pilot who carried a maverick attitude throughout his life. As a child in the 1930s and 40s, he spent countless seasons fishing here. Yellowstone is the world's oldest national park with an area larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. It's located on top of a supervolcano called a caldera and houses more than 10,000 geothermal features, accounting for half of the world's active geysers. Of course it's in Yellowstone. It's one of the most magical places in the world. Take that a little bit further, and everybody that was seriously hunting this treasure went way deeper than the poem. People had to dig deeper, they had to read his books, they had to listen to his life story. And the one thing I've thought about while we've been driving through the park here on this beautiful fall morning is what a magical time it must have been for Forrest to come here as a child and then come here later after his tour in Vietnam in the 70s and 80s, before the national parks had the level of traffic that they do now. We're at a crossroads where this window regulator has been slowly dying and making ominous noises. We're in this geyser basin which feeds into the headwaters of the Firehole River. Where warm waters halt certainly could be somewhere along either where this meets the river or where the Firehole River confluences and becomes the Madison River. So I think that's where we'll head to next. Aside from the geothermal activity, Yellowstone is home to the largest concentration of mammals in the lower 48 states, including the iconic bison, which have lived here since prehistoric times. No trip to Yosemite. No trip to Yellowstone would be complete without seeing Old Faithful, and we kind of got to keep our distance, so we've gone the long way around, but there it is. What's crazy is just how big Yellowstone National Park is. We've been driving for over an hour and we haven't even made it to the farthern end of the southern loop. It has been fantastic. It's taken us along the northern shore of Yellowstone Lake, and some people hypothesize that the treasure was hidden on one of these islands out in the lake. I don't subscribe to that theory. It doesn't jive with everything else we've heard. Also, I think what we do from here is we go north, we'll see the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, and then we intercept the Gibbon River, which is the other river that the Firehole confluence forms the Madison River. One of the more remarkable controversies surrounding it was in January of 2020, park rangers rescued a man who rappelled off this viewpoint 850 feet searching for the treasure, which is completely contrary to anything that Forrest Fenn would have done. As an 80-year-old man hauling a box of treasure, I don't think he's going to rappel off of the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. And if I was going to do that, I don't think I would do that in January. But good on him for trying, I guess. I mean, waterfalls are nice, but a van like that only drives by so often. And now we're at the headwaters of the Gibbons River. And the Gibbons River, based on our conversation with Larry yesterday, confluences with the Firehole River. I think if we follow this river downstream, we're gonna get a lot warmer to the actual spot of the treasure. We've followed the river downstream, and here we are along the banks of the Madison River. This is as close as we're gonna get to the spot. And of course it was here. If you read his books, if you listened to him talk about where he fished as a child, about a special place that he held dear, this is that spot. So let's go back to our mission. The thing that we set out to do was to retrace his steps. A man's gotta live by a code. Our code was safe, legal, respectful. We don't want to attract more people to this spot. The other people have done that. We don't need to do that. But at the same time, like, we need something we can touch, like something that's truly special to this place. So let's see what we got. Gold nugget, 48 gram from Fenn's treasure chest. We got this from our friend Larry on eBay, and in typical fashion, I didn't search for this in due time. We sent it FedEx first overnight. That this 48 gram gold nugget spent 10 years buried in an ancient treasure chest across that river. And in those 10 years, hundreds of thousands of people ventured out into the world, into the West, to try to find this. How many of them were serious and how many just wanted to go for a walk in the woods? The funny thing is, you don't have to twist my arm to come out here and try to retrace this treasure. When we thought up this idea, we were like, hell yeah, let's go. I'm ready to go tomorrow. But it's really cool to be able to hold this in my hand and to come full circle, and to do so, to complete that journey in a car that treated us wonderfully, that completed the mission wonderfully, in comfort and style, while delivering that old school driving experience that defines the golden era of these vehicles. And all of the dudes that came out of the weeds, that crossed 6 lanes of highways, that was a gift in and of itself. But of course, it was to get out and experience the wild and experience the West and experience many sacred spots along the way and have our own adventure. And that is the true treasure to be found. All the conspiracy and everything else that surrounds Forrest Fenn, on the face of it, that's all he wanted people to do, was to get out and explore, to get off the couch, to get out and take in the world. And we've done that. If we're only here for a minute, if we're only here in a glimpse of space and time, how do we come to a place like this and preserve it? How do we leave no trace? So I think that's part of the message too. The story definitely has sticking power, because here we are 4 years later after it was found. Our angle was just to have a cool road trip in a really cool old BMW. That one guy found the treasure, but another couple 100,000 people got to have their own adventure. And maybe some of those people wouldn't have had it otherwise. So the fact that he did that, the fact that yes, some people lost their lives, well, it doesn't diminish the loss of those families. But at the same time, a much larger swath of people had a great adventure, had a great story to tell. The whole reason to do all of this is to tell a story, to share an experience, to offer that experience to someone that might not have it otherwise. And if we've done that, for you, then we've satisfied our mission and we've had a lot of fun in the process.